Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to The Path to Success, Guide to Sustainable Design and Construction for Owners. This is a webinar brought to you by AIA Contract Documents. Before we get started, a few administrative items. All attendees are currently muted. If you have any questions, please use your question or chat in your GoToWebinar window to ask, and at the end of the presentation, time permitting, we will answer any questions that we can. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the AIA Contract Documents Learn page, and it will also be emailed to you along with the PowerPoint by tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our presenters, Colleen Telling. Colleen?
Thank you, Hasti, and welcome everyone to today's webinar about sustainability for owner projects. We're very happy that you can join us. Just a couple housekeeping items to cover. Our presentation today is protected by copyright laws, so we ask that you not reproduce any portion without requesting our permission. And none of the information here today is provided as legal advice, and no attorney-client relationship is established through this presentation. Speaking to you today will be Tracy Lee, who is a fellow of AIA and principal at SQ, Dumas, and Ripple in New Orleans, Louisiana. Tracy is a member of AIA's Documents Committee and has an extensive background in sustainable design. And the other speaker for our program today is myself, Colleen Telling. I'm manager and counsel at AIA as part of our Contract Documents program, and we are based in Washington, D.C. So what we hope to teach you today is why owners should choose sustainable elements for their projects. We'll give you a process to implement sustainable elements. We'll also discuss how and why roles and responsibilities should be established in your contracts. And lastly, we'll explain the value of using AIA documents for your successful projects. Our agenda today is going to cover a background on AIA contracts. We'll provide you with an understanding of sustainability and explain why owners should care about sustainability. Again, we'll provide a process to design for and implement your sustainable project. We'll look at how AIA documents can manage legal issues and provide value to your projects. So with that, let's look at a background on AIA contracts. So our Contract Documents program has a long-standing history. We've been publishing standard form documents since 1888. And on the right of your screen, you see our first A201 agreement from 1888. And we created these standard legal forms to make design and construction transactions more predictable. Our documents program has grown over the years, which reflects the complexity of the construction industry with different delivery methods. The documents can rely on uniform legal interpretations and have a nationwide application. To date, AIA offers nearly 200 agreements and forms. AIA documents are the industry standard because of their widespread use and the volume of case history and precedent that's incorporated in them. The document's longevity is a testament to their balanced nature. They've been drafted to represent each party's interest equally. Much of the contract language is about allocating risk to the party best able to manage and control that risk. Owners often choose to start with AIA contracts for easy negotiations. Contractors have said that when owners present them with an unaltered AIA A201, which is our general conditions, that they are more willing to sign. So our documents committee is comprised of 25 to 30 volunteers. They're a very diverse group from across the country and represent owners, architects, contractors, and insurers. Committee volunteers agreed to serve for 10 years, which coincides with the 10-year cycle in which we revise our documents. So the documents program seeks improvement with each new release. That drafting process begins by incorporating case law and comments from industry stakeholders and experts. Task groups then analyze and include this information in the drafts. Documents go through several drafts and revisions, which are reviewed by many industry practitioners. The final draft is submitted to the committee for approval and publication. So each group listed here plays an important role in AIA's document drafting process. Market research is conducted early on to identify issues and topics important to the industry. As broadly diverse as the committee is, there's still a need for industry stakeholders, other AIA groups, and subject matter experts and liaisons for added knowledge and feedback. The heavy lifting of writing and revising the documents is done by the volunteer committee members with assistance from the AIA staff. And now I will turn the presentation over to Tracy to discuss sustainability.
Thanks, Colleen. Good afternoon, everyone. I know when I started working on the committee 5.5 years ago, it was enlightening to me to hear that background and understand the process that is used to develop the documents. Sustainability, what is it and why should you care? Sustainable initiative can be something as simple as just putting a solar panel on the roof of your house, but it also is scalable at many levels. Large institutional buildings, hospitals, and the like can incorporate sustainable measures, and to most people it means energy efficiency and water conservation, but there's more to it than that. A simple set of definitions of sustainability can be a building project that incorporates design and construction practices that offer benefits to the environment or enhance the health and well-being of building occupants, something we're all very aware of right now, I think. Improves the life cycle of the building and its components. And of course, energy efficiency and water conservation are never too far from the top of the list. Sustainable buildings don't have to look like they came out of the woods. There are a lot of things that building owners and their design professionals and contractors can do to establish a level of sustainability. Lighting controls and the use of daylight in buildings is a good one. Thermal comfort to building occupants is something that's very important. Indoor air quality, which again we're all very aware of right now. Many people don't know that one of the major contributors to indoor air quality is contaminants that are tracked into a building on occupants' shoes. So there's a design solution for that can be incorporated that many people aren't really too thoughtful about. And then something as simple as the way a building is oriented, solar orientation and the size and scale of the building can affect its sustainability. What are the things that owners might want to get out of this, whether it's for reasons that align with your corporate values or your personal values as a building owner and operator, or whether it's for marketing and public relations purposes. You may want to get some kind of credential that shows that your building is green and sustainably sensitive. I think many people are familiar with LEED, the best known rating system out there. There also is Energy Star, which is a government-sponsored measure. Several others, Green Globes. We'll talk a little bit more about these later. And sometimes sensitive building owners just want to be able to measure the performance of their buildings and see what effect they're having on the health and wellness of occupants, or see how much energy or water they're conserving. It can be just as simple as that. In some cases, more and more we're seeing mandatory requirements for green buildings and sustainable design. There are a couple listed here. The International Green Construction Code is being adopted by more and more jurisdictions. If you've done any work for the GSA, it has a long-standing requirement that buildings have to be LEED Gold. And then many jurisdictions and communities, such as New Orleans, where I live, have written their zoning ordinances so that they incentivize development relative to sustainable design practices. You can, for instance, here in New Orleans, achieve a higher level of development density if you attain certain levels of sustainable design achievement. So I want to present a case study here. This is a few years old now, but many of the outcomes are relevant and still pertinent today, and some of the language that we'll be talking about when we get into the meat of the documents, the AIA exhibit that we'll be discussing today, a lot of the thinking behind the language in that came out of this case, and many like it. The project was constructed in 2001. It's the headquarters of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is a nonprofit founded in 1967. This was the first building in history to receive LEED Platinum certification, the highest level of certification that is available through the LEED program. The contractor was Clark Construction, one of the 10 largest general contractors and construction management firms in the country. The architect was Smith Group, which is a highly regarded, highly competent firm, large firm with offices all around the country and internationally. The building was really quite unique and ahead of its time. It had featured things like composting toilets, some innovative ways of rainwater retention and use, terrific natural lighting, low energy use and alternative energy sources. It uses geothermal heating and cooling, and also concentrated on use of materials that were low in emissivity, indoor air friendly materials with low VOC, volatile organic chemical emissions, and keep an eye on that one. The project's located right on Chesapeake Bay, very demanding environmental conditions, harsh temperature changes, moist, salty environment, tough place to build. The design called for a lot of exposed structural wood throughout the building, and the structural members were designed as kind of a composite wood material called paralams, which are highly sustainable. They use recycled wood materials along with some bonding resins, very efficient use of wood, but like all wood products, they're susceptible to moisture, and the way that these beams are constructed, they're especially so. These were sourced by the contractor from Weyerhaeuser, which is a Fortune 500 company. So I bring this up just to point out that there were no patsies in this. Everybody was very aware and experienced about what they were doing. Weyerhaeuser produced the wood beams and sourced the preservative material from a company called Permapost. Used a low-emitting green product with low VOCs to protect the wood from moisture intrusion. Building was completed in 2001. Almost immediately there were leaks detected, 2001, 2002. By the end of the 2000s, some of the structural members were beginning to rot to the point that there was some potential of structural failure. So, of course, everybody sued everybody, and eventually it was all settled out of court. The intent of presenting this case study to you is not to scare anybody or to discourage you from pursuing sustainable design. It's simply to point out that it's necessary to understand what the risks are and what they can be when you're working with kind of trying to push the envelope and work with some new materials and untested materials. Because this was settled out of court, there's no binding legal precedent, and Colleen can explain what that means if you have questions about it, but there's plenty of correspondence and documentation on this that give us some ideas, have given us some ideas about what we can try to put into our documents to make sure that the risk is allocated and everybody understands what's happening from the beginning. Two things that I took away from this personally are this, and you may find them instructive. First of all of the expert witnesses and the court jurors, the judges who were making the decisions about this, making the judgment about it, didn't really give too much credence to the fact that these were low emission green products. They were held to the same standards as anything else. So I think that's an important takeaway, that there wasn't any slack cut just because there was no offset just because this was an environmentally sensitive product. And the second takeaway for me was that in specifying these materials, as I said earlier, everybody kind of has to understand, owner, contractor, architect, that when you're doing something that's a little bit out of the mainstream perhaps, there's got to be an understanding that there's some risk involved. So with that, I'll send it back over to Colleen.
Okay, thank you very much, Tracy. So we've talked about what sustainability means. Now let's talk about why owners should consider sustainability to be important. So first, I just want to present you with a trivia question here. Carbon produced by buildings accounts for what percentage of greenhouse gases in the United States? If you selected B, 40%, that is the correct answer. In Chicago, there are buildings that generate about 53% of the city's emissions. By comparison, in Boston, buildings generate 75% of the city's emissions, so not just carbon. There are many reasons why an owner may wish to have a sustainable building, but a few of the most common are listed here. First, to minimize a building's environmental impact, an owner may consider reducing the building's carbon footprint and conserving water. To reduce carbon footprint, the ultimate goal is a net zero building, which means that a building releases as much energy as it consumes. Regarding water, an owner may choose to be sustainable and use captured rainfall or collected condensate for a chiller rather than potable water. Other considerations with water would be looking at low flow fixtures. And still other reasons owners choose to have a sustainable building are to lower their operational cost, improve occupant health and well-being, obtain certification, and for marketing purposes to achieve more money when it comes time to sell the building. Many certification systems provide diverse options that can be tailored to a specific project, budget, and sustainable objective. In addition to environmental benefits, certifications offer brand name recognition when leasing or selling a space. In selecting a certification system, an owner and architect should consider the cost of third-party certification, the cost of documentation, design and construction, and the life cycle cost for each one. Many certification systems are available. A few we've mentioned, like LEED and Green Globes, but some others that you may hear about are BOMA 360, BREEAM, Fitwel, the International Living Futures Institute, Passive House, STARS, and WELL. So it's good practice to perform energy modeling to ensure a building's high performance. Much of a building's energy use is tied to the building's function. So for example, a hospital can be incredibly energy intensive compared to an office. And from an owner's perspective, you want to look closely at occupancy schedules, occupant densities, operational hours, and the building's physical form to maximize energy savings. As you know, costs are an investment, and there is a misconception that sustainable design is expensive. So only a few projects can afford to be sustainable. And I would caution that that's not very true. So for instance, the cost of hiring an engineer can save 4 times the expenses in the long run. Additionally, being able to offer a sustainable building to a tenant can result in quicker lease than some competitors. Another positive result when certification is attained is the incentive of gaining additional floor area. Also think about material choices, how they improve the building's lifespan or return on investment. More durable materials might cost more upfront, but they could have significant long-term ROI. An example is photovoltaic systems, which decreased in price by 60% over 7 years. Grants and financing options can justify long-term investments. Owners may also consider a power purchase agreement, or PPA, where a portion of the building or site is leased to a third party for on-site renewable energy. The owner receives the benefits of a low-carbon energy source without substantial initial cost of the renewable system. Another reason that owners should consider implementing a sustainable project is due to incentives. Many jurisdictions, the federal government, and utilities offer incentives for projects that incorporate sustainable design and construction. And these incentives could include expedited permitting, tax rebates, deductions, and credits, extra development rights, and preferential treatment during entitlements. So some incentives are available only to the owner, others directly to the architect or contractor. And in AIA's E204, which is the Sustainable Projects exhibit, there's a prompt at the beginning of the document where the owner can name any incentive programs that it intends to pursue, as well as the deadline for those programs. PACE financing is helpful on projects that don't produce economic benefits in the short term, but that do in the long term. So there's a commercial PACE program and a residential program. Currently, the commercial program is more prevalent. And with PACE, property owners fully finance upfront cost of energy and other eligible improvements on a property. And they pay back those costs over time through a voluntary assessment on the property tax bill rather than through a mortgage. The assessment attaches as a lien to the real property, so not the property owner, and it takes priority over all liens except for real property taxes. The repayment obligation transfers automatically once the property is sold. And lastly here, increased property values almost always result when a project contains sustainable features. So owners have to decide if they will have a project with minimal sustainable features or maximum sustainable features and pursue a net zero building. Apart from that, some cities incorporate sustainability requirements into their codes. There's two notable examples of jurisdictions requiring green building in their local code. One is Cal Green, which is required throughout California, primarily for non-residential structures, which would include new buildings, additions, and alterations. The second example is the DC Green Building Act. That was actually enacted in 2006, and it requires all non-residential public buildings in DC to meet or exceed the LEED Silver level. And since 2012, there's been an addition so that all new private development projects that are 50,000 square feet or more have to meet or exceed the LEED certified level. And the levels from lowest to highest are certified, silver, gold, and platinum. Jurisdictions can also adopt green standards and codes. First example would be adopting a standard like ASHRAE 209, which it applies to new and renovated buildings as well as additions. Standard 209 gives a process for integrating energy modeling during design of the building. IECC establishes minimum regulations for energy efficient buildings. And the third one here, IGCC, stands for the International Green Construction Code, and that adds green provisions to existing codes like the International Building Code. So a couple of reasons why owners may choose to incorporate sustainability in their projects. One might be from a PR standpoint. So an owner who wants to create sustainable buildings might do so as part of its brand or marketing piece. And also for wellness. Sustainable design can support health and wellness for employees, occupants, and visitors to a building. And owners can take small steps toward wellness by reducing chemicals from indoor environments. That might be eliminating lead and formaldehyde, for instance. And then I would also point out that buildings are where people spend 90% of their time, but promoting the well-being of occupants, like having access to light, isn't always a major concern. And there are studies that show that people without access to daylight are actually less productive, less creative, and take more sick days. And one design tip that architects recommend is that no desk or workstation should be more than 25 feet from a window. And with that, I will now hand it back over to Tracy.
Thanks, Colleen. As a building owner, if you're on the fence about this, you should be aware that at the very least, the AIA Code of Ethics requires architects to consider sustainable options. And the language in the standard agreements include a certain amount of that kind of thing. If you want to kind of go above and beyond that, and we'll talk about the process to make that happen. A little bit of background here. Colleen mentioned the major documents are on a 10-year cycle, and the last edition was published in 2017, so the prior one was in 2007. The 2007 owner-architect agreement had a little bit of language in there about the architect, including some considerations for environmental responsiveness in the design. By that time, green buildings and sustainable design were really emerging, and so the contract documents were included language to reflect that. Things continued on the trajectory. The D503 document called Guide for Sustainable Projects is a free downloadable PDF that's available through the AIA website. It was first published in 2011 and recently updated in 2020. By 2013, sustainable design had become mainstream enough that the AIA decided to publish an entire suite of agreements that ran kind of parallel to the traditional agreements that were oriented towards sustainable design. But in 2017, when the 2017 documents were being reviewed for republication, the decision was made to scrap the SP family and try to collect all the parts and pieces required of owner, architect, contractor, subcontractors, consultants, owners consultants, and gather them all together in one single succinct place. And so that was the reasoning behind the E204 Sustainable Projects Exhibit, which we'll talk about. The purpose of the E204 is to kind of map out a process for achieving this. It includes some elements, some definitions, and discussion about concepts that are outside the normal standard AIA documents. Go through a few of those. You can see them listed here. We'll go through these sort of one by one. The sustainable objective is probably the single most important part of this entire process, and that comes from the owner, derives from the owner. It's a statement of the owner's goal for the project, however ambitious it may be. A sustainable measure is anything, whether it's design or construction or post-occupancy operation, that has to happen to help support the sustainable objective. The sustainability plan is a written document that tries to gather all this information together and memorialize it in a way that everyone can understand. And the important thing about the sustainability plan is that it is a contract document. It's a legally binding document that becomes an attachment to several different agreements, the owner-architect agreement, owner-contractor agreement, and others, that includes the strategies intended and designed to achieve the sustainable measures and get everybody to the goal line and outline everyone's responsibilities for accomplishing that. If the choice is to pursue a certification such as LEED or WELL or some of the others that you see here. Certification process is identified in the E204 and described as to what that means and what's required of all parties to get there. The documentation that's required to achieve certification above and beyond the normal construction documentation that's required to build a building is identified in a kind of a large-scale way in the E204 with room for a little more precision about that in the sustainability plan. The architect is identified as the person who administers the process and collects the documentation and is responsible for making whatever submittals are required to attain the certification. And then the certifying authority is someone like the GBCI Green Building Certification Institute, that is the third-party external organization responsible for certifying and verifying that a project has met the requirements of something like LEED. So how do the architect's services in a sustainable project differ from normal standard practice? Well, one very important thing that happens early in the process is the sustainability workshop. Some people call it an eco-charrette. And this is outlined in the exhibit. The intention is for this to happen early in the process. It's mandated that it happen before the end of schematic design, sometimes earlier than that. One of the outcomes of the sustainability workshop is a sustainability plan, which we talked about a little bit. And of course that includes the sustainable measures needed to get there. Another responsibility of the architect is ensuring that the design is conducted in a way that will meet the sustainable objective and result in an environmentally responsive building. During the construction phase, the emphasis shifts a bit to the contractor becoming more involved and more responsible, but the architect still has a level of responsibility and oversight to make sure that the contractor and the owner are living up to their part of the bargain. And then the actual registration process and the administrative documentation and submission to the certifying authority, if there is one, is the architect's responsibility. So the sustainability workshop, as I said, along with this plan itself, is probably the key, most critical element to this entire process. This should involve the owner, the architect's consultants, engineering consultants, any consultants that the owner may have, commissioning provider if there is one. If there happens to be a contractor or a construction manager involved at this stage, often there's not this early in design, but if there is, or a cost estimator, those people should definitely be a part of this. And the intended result of the workshop is the sustainability plan. The plan is, as I mentioned, intended to be a binding contractual document, and in the flagship agreements, the owner-contractor agreements, there's a checkbox or a fill point to indicate that the sustainability plan is attached to and part of the contract. So I can't emphasize the importance of that enough, that this really does become part of everyone's binding responsibilities to adhere to the sustainability plan to the extent possible. The document that I mentioned, the D503 Guide to Sustainable Projects, includes several template sustainability plans. They're all organized in this kind of Excel-like chart manner. There is a generic one which you're looking at here. There's also one that's more focused on LEED as a methodology or a path to sustainability, and it closely reflects what's in the LEED scorecard. If you're familiar with the LEED process, the sustainability measures are identified, and in the case of LEED, they're pretty much prescriptive according to the LEED credit requirements. Whether the credit is necessary for achieving this sustainable objective or the certification is identified, whether it's mandatory or whether it's something that's just intended to get there. Very critical, there's an allocation of responsibility for each of these items noted clearly in the sustainability plan, and then a description of whatever strategies or details are necessary to get there. So this is just one example of several that are contained in the Guide to Sustainable Projects. Hope you all will find this useful as an introduction to that, but there's plenty more depth to be found in that document. And we'll now pass it back over to Colleen to talk about the owner's role in this process.
Okay, thank you once again, Tracy. So as Tracy mentioned, we'll turn now to the owner's sustainability responsibilities as outlined in the E204. A sustainable project may require specific owner responsibilities before, during, and after construction. Prior to construction, the owner will need to select its project site, materials, and equipment that are consistent with the sustainable objective. During construction, the owner will need to coordinate its special consultants with the architect and contractor to ensure that the parties are communicating, and also provide information such as building operation budgets to achieve the sustainable objective. After construction, the owner has to operate and maintain the building in accordance with its sustainable features. E204 also requires the owner to comply with requirements of the certifying authority relative to the ownership, operation, and maintenance of the project. The owner is also responsible for preparing, filing, and prosecuting appeals to the certifying authority if they arise from revoking or reducing an awarded certification. Under E204, the owner is to hire an agent who will be responsible for commissioning the project. So essentially just starting everything up and making sure all the controls work. Alternatively, the owner can engage the architect if the jurisdiction permits that. In some situations, such as pursuing LEED certification, the owner might be required to provide portions of the architect's instruments of service to the certifying authority. Examples of instruments of service are the architect's studies, models, and drawings. The architect grants a license to the owner for use of its instruments of service in what is our B101 owner-architect agreement, but that does not extend to submissions to the certifying authority. So E204 allows the owner to submit the architect's instruments of service to the certifying authority. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our program, it's important that a contract assign risk to the party who's best able to manage and control that risk. Achieving the sustainable objective relies on more than the contractor's performance. The owner must perform the sustainable measures that are assigned to it. And section 4.2 here of the E204 requires the owner to provide relevant and necessary information upon the architect or contractor's request. Some examples might include record drawings, master plans, and repair records. Part of the owner's scope is to require that each of its contractors and consultants perform their services in accordance with the sustainability plan. The E204 provisions on your screen here make that clear. And now we're going to transition to using AIA documents to address legal issues on sustainable projects. So some key topics that we're going to cover include substantial and final completion, standard of care, guarantees and warranties, untested materials, which you heard Tracy discuss in his example of the Chesapeake Bay case, project registration, consequential damages, and substitutions. So these are all risk factors that are very important for owners to understand. Substantial completion occurs when the project can be occupied and used for its intended purpose. Because the contractor can't control the review and approval process of a certifying authority, which may not occur until after substantial completion, we don't tie substantial completion to achieving the sustainable objective. If the contractor is responsible after substantial completion for completing any sustainable measures, then the owner may wish to have a performance bond in place or negotiate an extended correction period, just as additional protection to ensure completion. Final completion occurs when the contractor's work has been completed in accordance with the terms and conditions of the contract documents, and the balance in the final certificate for payment is due and payable. Verifying that the project achieved the sustainable objective may not occur until after completion, when the contractor has already completed its punch list. So here again, the owner may find protection in the form of a performance bond or an extended warranty. So the architect's standard of care is defined in that B101 owner-architect agreement, as opposed to the E204 Sustainable Projects Exhibit. And as more jurisdictions institute green building standards by code, the architect's standard of care could include requirements established by newly adopted codes or practices. Achieving the sustainable objective depends not only on the design of the project, but on the owner's use and operation of the project, the work provided by the contractor, or the owner's other consultants and contractors, or interpretation of credit requirements by the certifying authority. So as a consequence, the architect and contractor aren't in a position to guarantee or warrant that the project will achieve the sustainable objective. So the owner's sustainable objective or other project requirements may call for using untested materials and equipment. The architect or its consultants may be unable to confirm a track record of reliability for some materials and equipment. If the materials or equipment fail to perform the way that the manufacturer has represented, then the project may not achieve the sustainable objective. So it's important that an architect discuss these untested products with owners so that they're fully informed of potential impacts. Registration fees for projects pursuing a sustainability certification can be very significant. Often owners request architects to pay these fees. In the B101, we provide that these fees are a reimbursable expense. The architect can also collect an initial payment from the owner to cover these expenses. So consequential damages are typically unforeseen. They often arise as a result of delay by either the owner or contractor. Consequential damages aren't easy to prove, and they can result in lengthy claims and disputes. AIA has included mutual waivers of consequential damages in its agreements for the last 23 years. And consequential damages on any particular sustainable project could include things like unachieved energy savings, unintended operational expenses, and lost financial or tax incentives. So by including the model language here, the parties agreed that these types of damages are consequential and waived. On sustainable projects, substitutions may impact achieving the sustainable measures. So E204 requires that the contractor include a statement with substitutions that identifies any effect the substitution may have on achieving the sustainable objective or measure. But the contractor may not be aware of why specific materials or equipment were specified. Therefore, the contractor can request additional information from the architect as to why the original material was specified. And I will now turn the presentation back over to Tracy.
Thanks, Colleen. We've been focusing on the E204 Sustainable Projects exhibit during this presentation, and it's really intended and designed to be used with what we call the traditional or flagship set of agreements, the A101 owner-contractor agreement, the B101 or B103 owner-architect agreement, the A201 general conditions. These are generally used in traditional design bid build or perhaps negotiated qualifications-based contractor selection situations. Of course, there's an emerging trend now for alternative delivery methods, non-traditional methods, such as construction management or design build. And the E204 exhibit doesn't quite fit those. So the Documents Committee has worked to try to develop some parallel documents exhibits to satisfy those requirements. The E234 and 235 are concerned with construction management delivery methods, whether it's construction manager as constructor, which some people refer to as CM at risk. It recognizes the unique role that the CM plays during the process and its place in the entire process from the very early stages of the project, pre-design, all the way through substantial completion and beyond. Also, the E235 document is very similar but pertains to the CM as advisor or CM as agent, as some call it, and recognizes the unique position that the CM has in the process of oversight and overview and actively participating on behalf of the owner in the process of constructing and delivering sustainable building. Finally, the design build set of documents includes an exhibit, and you'll see that this actually predates the E204, and concept of E204 was based on the success of the design build exhibit C, which was published in 2014. Again, slightly different and tailored to the unique provisions of a design-build type arrangement between owner and contractor, design builder in that process. To kind of recap a few things here, if your intent as a building owner is to pursue sustainable objectives and produce and own and maintain and operate a green building, the AIA has worked hard to put together a set of documents that help accomplish that make it clear contractually what everyone is supposed to do, including owner, contractor, and architect, to hopefully take some of the guesswork out of risk management and distribute the risk to the parties that have the best ability to bear it, that are the most responsible. And then finally, the E204 in this entire process requires the owner to involve commissioning provider, CXA, CXP, commissioning agent, or commissioning providers, commonly known. This is a very valuable concept. Generally speaking, the savings over time that can result from employing a CXP gives a payback of a couple or 3 years. It provides for the owner, I think, a bit of assurance that they have a dispassionate third-party person watching over the process on their behalf to make sure that everybody's doing what they need to do and that the processes are being followed. And I think that, and this can continue on into post-construction and post-occupancy. When you get into operations and maintenance of the building, the commissioning agent can be a very valuable ally of the building owner in that process. So these are some of the things that we hope you'll take away from the discussion today about owner's place in this process and the owner's responsibilities and obligations with regard to sustainable design and green buildings. So I'll pass it back now to Hasti for a wrap-up.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. I wanted to show the attendees today our contact and resources. So this webinar is recorded. You will receive the recording as well as the PowerPoint via email, but we also will upload this webinar to our Learn page, which is aiacontracts.org/learn. You can find a plethora of on-demand webinars, upcoming live webinars, and other resources on this page, so I highly recommend it. For any questions that you have about AIA contract documents content or this webinar, you can direct them to docinfo@aiacontracts.org or 202-626-7526. And any questions about our online service, you can also contact tech support at aiacontracts.org or 1-800-942-7732. I want to thank the presenters today for their time and effort in preparing and presenting this webinar. And I want to thank all of the attendees for joining us. Again, you will receive the PowerPoint and recording, and we thank you for your interest. Have a wonderful afternoon.